I'll call you Father because I have to do this. All right, here we go. No, this is the first question. What are the most important moral issues facing America today? And what should be the role of the Episcopal Church and Episcopalians in addressing them? Are you aware of the public policy network recently established among the 6 dioceses of California? How would you encourage and participate in this?
Well, I think the most important moral issue facing America right now is fear. Fear, for me, is the root of every other moral issue that we've had. Immigration is fear that folks are leaving their country to come to a different place for better life. Gun violence is fear of the other, and so I have to arm myself. The list can go on and on and on, but I think that the most pressing issue is fear. And I think that we as Episcopalians, as Christians, as followers of Jesus, have something that combats fear. Because we know that perfect love casts out fear. And so I think that we need to create a world that is a little bit more loving. And I think it needs to start with you and I. I don't think that we can sit around and wait for our political leaders and all that stuff to do it. I think you and I have to do it. We have to model for our world a different way of doing and a different way of being. And I think that we who follow Jesus need to take him as our model. I mean, when he encountered the scribes and the Pharisees, what he did was allay their fears. And I think that's what you and I are called to do. I think that here in the Diocese of Waggoner and in the state of California, that public policy network that has been formed is an amazing thing, and it's a great way for leadership throughout the diocese to be engaged in public policy. But I think what's much more important and what's more needed is your voice. It's great for the bishops to say something or to have a stance on climate change or gun control or the school-to-prison pipeline, and it's great for politicians to dismiss 6 or 7 folks with pointy hats. It's a little bit more difficult to dismiss a couple thousand people who get up and say, you will not separate children from their families in my name. You will not sell high-capacity magazines to people who can go mow down a bunch of folks in about 15 seconds. So I really do think that once we begin to work on that fear, once we allow that love that we find in Jesus Christ to be a part of who we are, once we begin to engage with those who are different and those who look different than us and think different than us and love different than us, I think once we begin to do all of that, then I think that most of these moral issues will begin to go away.
What do you think would be the most important quality or skill for the next Bishop of El Camino Real to possess?
Just one?
The most important.
Well, I think the most important one for me would be to be open. To literally be open. To listen. The reason why I say that is because I'm from Michigan. This is California. The weather's a lot different. And so for me, I don't know. I mean, I'm loving the weather, don't get me wrong. But I don't know the communities. I don't know what the hopes and the fears of the different congregations are. I don't know what they're dreaming of. And so before I can come and say, well, this is my vision for where we need to go, I think the first thing that the bishop would have to do is listen, is to hear where the diocese wants to go and what you want to do. Because Bishop Mary has done an amazing job of being a reconciler and healing the diocese and casting a new vision. And I think your next bishop has to be able to be open and listen to where the congregations and communities are calling before doing anything or before going further forward. Because the new bishop has, I call it a nice learning curve. I have to get to know you. And one of the things for me that has been absolutely amazing is that we've been eating our way across the diocese. And I would love to be able to, at some point, For instance, to say to the diocese, well, hey, let me eat my way across the diocese and get to know each one of the congregations. At an earlier walkabout, I said, one of the things that would be a priority for me in the first year would be to go visit every single congregation. Go visit every ministry. Go spend some time out in the field with the migrant workers to see what their lives are like. To go do the things, that's happening in the diocese so that I get a better sense of who the diocese is and where the diocese wants to go. Because the reality is the bishop gets to see the panorama. The bishop visits every congregation and gets to see all the stuff. But individual congregations don't get to see the panorama. And so before you can cast a wide vision, you have to hear from every individual picture before you can cast that picture. So for me, the biggest quality that the bishop needs to possess is to be open, to listen.
El Camino has a large and vibrant Latinx community, which is a rapidly growing part of our diocese. Some face challenges around language, poverty, and access to appropriate theological training, especially for ordination. How would you engage, include, and support this community in all its diversity?
Thank you. The Latinx population is really important for me because my husband's Mexican. And if it weren't, I suspect my household would be a little bit of a problem. But I do think that the Diocese of El Camino Real especially, but I think all the dioceses, need leadership that speaks Spanish. I do not speak Spanish fluently. I can say Mass in Spanish and I can engage in basic conversation, but I can't. It is not my native tongue. But I think that it's really important that we nourish and encourage those ministries, not just Latinx, but all the other languages and cultures that are present here in the diocese. I think we need to take a new approach to how we form folks in the ordination process, because sending off to seminary at some point is not going to be sustainable. In my diocese, we have created the Whittaker Institute, which forms locally priests and deacons. And by doing that, we look to the resources that are already in the diocese to be able to help some of that formation. I can see that happening here by using some of the Latino leaders to be faculty members in training deacons and priests. I can see that in using folks who speak Tagalog to be able to come and train Filipino folks in how to become better priests and whatnot. So I'm a firm believer that everything that you have, that you need, is already present in the diocese. It's a matter of leveraging it to be able to do that. The other part, I think, is to be able to be creative and innovative in how we do our ministry. My parish is part of an experimental community called Tritank, which is a collaboration between Virginia Theological Seminary and General Theological Seminary. And they're doing some amazing work around Latino ministry in a box. And what that is that they provide you with a phonetic version of the Eucharistic prayers so that non-Spanish speakers can say Mass in Spanish. They then provide you with Bible study videos and trainings that you can use with a non-English speaking community. They also then offer sermons for each Sunday based on the Revised Common Lectionary by priests and deacons who are native Spanish speakers that you can use for your community. So that's just one way that the church is able to try to be innovative. But I really do think that the church has got to stop thinking inside the box and start being creative and collaborative outside the box and think of doing things in a new and different way.
Do you feel Episcopal bishops should engage in publicly suggesting and pressing for policy and law changes on political topics such as immigration, gun violence, climate change, etc.? If yes, to what extent and how would you involve the diocese's clergy and laity? What would this kind of leadership look like for you, and would you expect to collaborate with other bishops?
Yes, 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 definitely. I think I mentioned this a little earlier, but I think that the bishop really should engage in public issues around immigration and gun control and the school-to-prison pipeline and recidivism and all those issues out there. And I think that that's a wonderful thing, but I don't think the bishop alone needs to be the only voice. One of the things that was absolutely fascinating for me as we've been kind of working our way across the diocese is that we stopped at St. Benedict's, and they decided to take on climate change as their ministry, their big thing. Now, if you can imagine all the congregations across the diocese picking one big thing in their area to be their big thing. So, one congregation took on gun control, another one took on, clean water, another one took on the school-to-prison pipeline. These would be some amazing ministries happening in congregations that when the bishop speaks about climate change, they can say, hey, go talk to the folks at St. Benedict's, they are doing that work. Go talk to people at St. Swithin's because they are working on gun control. And it strengthens the voice of not just the bishop, but the congregations. Because as I said, the bishop is just one voice. I think the way that we foment change in our communities, in our society, is with you. When you start saying, these things should not be done in my name. When you start saying to our political leaders, look, separating children from their families is not something that we find to be moral. There's a lot more of you than there are bishops. Thank God. But it does mean that you have to be able to find your voice in speaking on these issues, and I think that the bishop becomes the chief inspirational officer to get you out there to do it. I think the bishop casts the vision for you to do it, and then the members of the communities go forward and try to make that vision a reality. And so I really do think that having that voice in the public square, because for better or for worse, the voice of Christianity has been co-opted in the public square. And I think we need to reclaim our rightful voice to say, this is not moral. This is not right. And so for me, I think the bishop has the possibility and ability to inspire the communities and congregations to tackle the moral issues of our time by being inspirational and vision casting.
The role of a bishop is demanding. How do you practice self-care? What do you do to renew yourself? Is there anything that we in the diocese could do to support our bishop's self-care?
How do I practice self-care? Well, I can tell you that one of the things in my congregation right now is that they know do not call the priest on Friday. It is his day off. It is his Sabbath. It is his time to sit down on the couch with Netflix. Don't call. Unless it's a really big emergency. But they know that the priest, and I suspect the bishop, need time to rest, to recreate, to reconnect to that deep well that is out there that keeps us creative and learning. And the thing is, I think the clergy, not just the bishop, all the clergy and the laity need those times of rest and recreation. So for me, I do a couple things. I take my day off and I take it really seriously. I had the good fortune back in 2014 to go on sabbatical. 3 months of being away and just being, reading and going to enjoy the great outdoors. And one of the things that I love, because I grew up in the Caribbean, I love to be outside in the sun. And I live in Michigan. Where from November to about May, you don't see the sun. But for me, anything that gets me outdoors, so like we have love, I was up at 6:30 this morning walking along the beach. I would never be outside at 6:30 in the morning in Michigan. So simply having a beach for me to go walk along would be great. But taking that time to just rest. And I think if the bishop can model that time of rest, it means that the clergy need to take that time of rest, to go on retreat. I have a spiritual director that insists that I take my time off and go on retreats and all that stuff. And I think that is something that we need to model for the laity as well, because let's be honest, we are all sometimes completely overworked. And the reality is we need Sabbath. We need time to just go, and put our feet up and just fall into God's presence. Because here's the thing, that's what Jesus did. If you listen to Jesus going throughout the Gospels, every once in a while, if you pay attention, you will hear this line. Jesus went off to a quiet place by himself. Because if Jesus needs Sabbath, the bishop definitely needs Sabbath, the clergy needs Sabbath, and the laity needs Sabbath. We all need those times to reconnect to that source and fill us back up so that we can go back out into the world. Because as the old adage says, if you're not good to yourself, you can't be good to anybody else.
Many Episcopal parishes are in a position of needing to redevelop their practices, emphasis, and perhaps their mission in order to be sustainable. What part do you think the bishop and the diocese should take in this redevelopment work? Do you see this as only a money problem, or is there also a failure of leadership in the church?
I see we're going with short questions. Well, I think that the role the bishop plays in redevelopment and growing of congregations is to partner with congregations. I don't think that the bishop can come in and say, this is what you have to do and you'll experience growth. It just doesn't and would not work. I think the bishop comes alongside with the congregation and asks, how can my office, how can the resources that are available be used to help you do the things that you need to do in order for your congregation to grow? In my own congregation, when I first arrived, we had a building that was lots of deferred maintenance, would be a nice way of putting it. We had a $65,000 deficit when I got there. We had very few kids, and so one of the things that we did is we started looking outside of our building. We intentionally spent time going, okay, what can we do out in the community to engage our community? Because it's really easy to get myopic and to look inward and say there's not enough money, there's not enough people, the building's falling down. You know, we can like put ourselves in a bind worrying about what's inside the building. And so my congregation, when we started reaching out, when we started looking and saying, where can we find Jesus and how can we minister to him out in the community, that's when we started seeing growth. Back in 2014, my parish dedicated our new building. We built a $2.2 million building that people had dreamt of for decades, because we turned our focus from looking at ourselves and looking outward. Because I really do believe that every community, every congregation has everything that they need for growth and revitalization right there. One of the things that I've done in the Diocese of Michigan is that I was a chair of vital congregations for about 6 years. They were tasked with creating or helping congregations to be more vital and sustainable. And with that work, there were lots of congregations who were literally looking inward and were not engaging their community. The ones that turned out and that looked outside and began to engage and started to say, okay, what ministries are present or need to be present in this community, they were the ones who turned around. And from my congregation, what was amazing was that the bishop came to us and said, okay, this is what you want to do. What resources do you need from me to help you do that? And so for me, that would be the model that I would follow, to come and say, I'm going to walk with you. Let me know how I can do that, because to impose my will on you would not be helpful for either one of us.
All right, we have questions from the floor time.
I can't see your name, Kevin.
Hi, I'm Judith.
Judith.
And my question, in this age of Me Too, what would you see as like the essential elements of the church's response to things like clergy sexual conduct that would model a more redeeming way of dealing with these situations?
Do you need to repeat the question?
She's asking about what we should do in response to the Me Too generation and and what the church can do to be more forward-thinking about that, or redeem ourselves.
I think the biggest thing that we can do with Me Too is be more transparent. I think that a lot of what happens or has been happening with Me Too is a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability. We're not just seeing it in our church, we're seeing it happening across the churches and now across corporate America. And part of that has been a level of secrecy, of shame, because the biggest thing that you can do is shame someone into not talking about what's happening to them. And so to be able to name something reclaims it. In the 1928 prayer book, the priest would say to the parents of the child being baptized, "Name this child." And that naming was Christ claiming the child. And I think that in the church, once we start naming things, we have to claim it. So once we start naming Me Too and abuse and some of the other things that's happened in the past in the church, we claim it. And once it's claimed, it means that we can begin to redeem it. And so for me, I think transparency and claiming and taking the responsibility for what we have done and not done is extremely important.
We have another question, or?
I've been back.
George has a question.
George.
Back 10 years or so ago, the Diocese of Michigan was in serious difficulty. What has happened in the last 10 years that you've learned from that the recovery experience that your diocese has been through that might be appropriate here?
So for those of you who may not know, the Diocese of Michigan, about 10 years ago, we went through a complete realignment. There was not enough money to pay for, our staff had gotten pretty big, and so 2/3 of the diocesan staff had to be cut. It was painful. But once the initial shock wore off, it was what do we do next? And the thing that they did next was realize that we don't have to have a person for every single ministry that's going on, that we can use the resources that are already in the diocese to do some of that work. Like for instance, right now my Diocese of Michigan does not have a canon to the ordinary. We have a canon for transition ministry, we have a canon for learning, we have a canon for administration, and some of the work of the canon for the ordinary is done in committees or in teams. For instance, we have a youth missioner who is a missioner, but there's a youth missioner support group that kind of helps that missioner do their work. So what we've done is we have, because I'm on standing committee right now, so we get to see some of this. So what we've done is we've dispersed some of the ministry that was done by some of those staff folks out into the diocese, and it's been much, much, much healthier. What's happened is that each year we've had, in the Diocese of Michigan, at least for the last 6 or 7 years, we've had either a balanced budget or a surplus budget. We've actually hired a couple extra people onto diocesan staff because we needed those roles to kind of help govern or to help direct some of the ministry that's come up.
All right, thank you very much.